The silence that shook the hall. The night was filled with lights, colors, and restless energy. People had waited for weeks for this music show. The hall was huge, and every seat was taken. The crowd clapped and shouted with excitement. The stage, glowing under warm golden beams. Musicians tuned their instruments, and the air carried the weight of expectation. Among the audience sat Keanu Reeves, quiet and humble as always, unnoticed by many who did not expect a famous actor to be there. He did not seek attention. He only came because he loved music and respected the courage it took for anyone to stand on stage. The first singer walked in, young and full of nervous fire. She was known for her clear voice, but her eyes revealed fear as she faced the endless rows of people. When the music began, her voice trembled. At first, it sounded strong, but then something went wrong. The lyrics slipped away from her memory, and her voice stopped in the middle of a note. The hall froze. The crowd that had been loud turned into a heavy silence. It was the kind of silence that cuts deeper than noise because it carried judgment and disbelief. Her hands shook as she tried to remember the words, but nothing came. She looked at the band, at the floor, anywhere but at the people staring at her. Some in the audience whispered, some laughed softly, and others shook their heads. Her eyes filled with tears that she tried to hide, but the stage lights made everything visible. She felt smaller with every passing second. For her, that moment felt like the end of her dream. She wanted to run, but her feet would not move. In the back, someone began clapping. It was soft at first, a single pair of hands breaking the silence. People turned to see who dared to clap during her mistake. It was Keanu Reeves, standing slowly, his face calm, his eyes filled with respect. He was not mocking her, he was lifting her. His hands clapped louder, steady, strong, like a message that said failure does not define you. The sound echoed through the hall, and others began to follow. The clapping grew, spreading across rows until the hall was filled with applause again. The young singer looked up, shocked. She saw him standing there not as a star, but as a human being telling her she was still worthy. His respect lit something inside her. The fear did not vanish, but it gave her strength to try again. She took a breath, closed her eyes, and sang the next line with trembling courage. The crowd, once ready to laugh, now leaned forward, waiting to hear her. The band joined back in, the melody carrying her voice like gentle arms. Though she was not perfect, her heart was open, and that changed everything. The audience began to feel something rare. They were not just watching a performance. They were watching resilience. Every note she sang after that carried the weight of struggle and the power of not giving up. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. She forgot again, but she smiled through it. And every time the clapping grew louder, reminding her that respect and kindness could change even the hardest moment. In that hall, a small act of standing up turned into a wave of support. Keanu did not shout. He did not point. He only gave the kind of respect that people forget to give in a world that loves perfection but forgets compassion. And because of that, a night that could have been remembered for shame was now remembered. For courage, the singer finished her song, not flawless, but beautiful. When she bowed, tears ran down her face, and the crowd stood with her. She whispered thank you, though her voice could hardly be heard over the cheers. She looked at Keanu, and their eyes met for a brief moment. It was not about fame, not about power. It was about one soul reminding another that dignity is never lost, even when mistakes are made. Yet deep in that moment, nobody knew that this single act would start a chain of events. Hidden stories, unseen battles, and quiet hearts would soon come forward because of this one night. The stage that began with silence would now carry lessons of kindness, humility, and strength. And this was only the beginning. Whispers after the song, the applause slowly faded, but the memory of that moment stayed in the air. People in the audience could still feel their hearts beating faster, not because the song was perfect, but because the singer had fought her fear and finished. Some smiled. Others wiped their eyes without even knowing why. The hall was filled with a strange silence again, but this time it was warm, not heavy. It was the silence of people who had witnessed something real. Backstage, the young singer collapsed, on a chair. Her breathing was sharp and tears ran down her face. She felt both broken and saved at the same time. The stage manager tried to comfort her, but nothing touched her heart like the image of that man who stood up for her. She had seen him only in movies, never in real life, and she could hardly believe he would rise for someone like her. She whispered to herself, "Why would he do that for me?" The question repeated in her mind like an unfinished song. Meanwhile, in the audience, people began to talk. Whispers moved from row to row. Some said it was just a kind gesture. Others said it was more than that. One man told his friend, "I will never forget this night. I came here for music, but I think I found a lesson instead." Another woman leaned forward and said softly, "He gave her back her dignity." How often do we see that anymore? The whispers carried respect, but also a sense of curiosity. They wondered what it meant when a person known for fame and success chose humility over silence. Keanu himself did not speak. He sat back down quietly, his face calm, his hands resting on his knees. He did not want attention, but attention always found him. Those sitting nearby kept glancing at him, waiting for some kind of explanation, but he gave none. Inside his heart, though, he was remembering his own past. He, too, had faced moments when the world watched him stumble. He knew how sharp judgment could feel, and how a single act of kindness could save a soul from drowning in shame. As the show continued with other performers, the hall was no longer the same. Every act after that carried a shadow of the first one. Singers sang with extra courage, as if they too felt protected by the wave of respect that had filled the room. Some forgot small parts of their songs, but the crowd no longer laughed or judged. They clapped louder, offering strength instead of scorn. The mood of the night had shifted completely, but behind the stage, something else was building. The young singer, still shaken, received a message from another artist waiting to perform. It said, "You gave me courage. I was afraid too, but now I will sing with my whole heart." She held the phone close to her chest, realizing that her mistake had become a spark for someone else. She thought, maybe my failure was not the end. Maybe it was the start. Yet not everyone accepted this change. Among the audience were critics and reporters, ready to write stories about weakness and failure. One critic whispered to another, "This will make headlines. She forgot her lyrics. People love drama." But his partner replied, "Did you not see how the crowd reacted? Maybe the real story is about respect, not failure." They argued in low voices, not realizing that the story was already bigger than their words. As the night moved forward, eyes kept finding their way back to Keanu. He did nothing more than listen and watch, but his presence carried weight. The young singer, peeking from backstage, kept searching for him too. Her heart wanted to thank him, but her fear still held her back. She wondered if she would ever have the courage to speak to him face to face. And deep in the shadows of the hall, a man with tired eyes watched everything. He was not a singer, not a critic, just a worker who cleaned the hall after shows. His life had been hard, and he often felt invisible. But that night, when he saw one person stand up to honor another, something stirred inside him. He thought about his own life, the times he had been laughed at, the times he wished someone had stood up for him. He whispered to himself, "Maybe kindness is stronger than I thought." What no one knew yet was that this moment would not end with a single song. It would spread like ripples on water, touching lives in ways that could not be seen at once. The show was not over, and neither was the story. Something far deeper was about to begin. The courage to return, the show moved on, But people in the hall could not let go of what had happened. Every new song was heard with softer hearts, as if the audience had been reminded of their own fragile humanity. But backstage, the young singer sat alone in a small corner, her face hidden behind her hands. She replayed every second of her mistake in her mind. The sound of silence, the whispers, the laughter, it all cut her deeper than any wound. Yet among those memories, one image stood brighter than the rest. Keanu standing, clapping, his calm, eyes holding no judgment, only respect. The stage manager came to her and said gently, "You did well. The people are with you." But she shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I failed." Her voice broke when she said it. Failure was heavy inside her chest, like a stone she could not lift. The stage manager sighed, not knowing how to reach her. Then a voice came from behind. It was another performer, a young man holding his guitar. He said, "You think you failed, but you gave me something I didn't have before. I was shaking with fear, too. But when I saw you stand there, when I saw you keep singing even with mistakes, I thought, if she can keep going, then so can I." His words surprised her. She looked up, eyes wet with tears, and saw that he meant it. Her weakness had given someone else strength. She thought about it deeply. Maybe failure was not the end. Maybe it could be a bridge for others. And as that thought settled in her mind, she realized she still had one more chance. The night was not finished yet. The host had announced earlier that all singers would return for a final performance together. She had time to choose. She could hide in the shadows, or she could return with courage. In the audience, Keanu remained silent, his thoughts wandering. He remembered times when life had broken him, times when loss and pain almost silenced him, forever. He knew what it felt like to stand alone in the storm, and he knew how one voice of kindness could make the storm feel smaller. He hoped that young singer would not give up. He did not want her to remember this night as the night she failed, but as the night she found her strength. As the show neared its end, the host invited all the performers to gather for one last song. Backstage, the young singer felt her chest tighten. Her knees trembled. She almost told herself to stay behind. But then she remembered the sound of applause when she stood back up earlier. She remembered the look in Keanu's eyes, and the words of the guitarist who said her courage gave him courage. Slowly, with shaking hands, she walked back toward the stage. When the lights hit her again, whispers moved across the hall. Some wondered if she would break again. Others leaned forward, curious to see if she had healed. The music began, and this time her voice was steady. It was not perfect, but it was real. Her notes carried both fear and bravery, a strange mix that made them more powerful. The audience listened, not for flawless sound, but for the truth in her tone. Something unexpected happened. Midway through the song, the guitarist who had spoken to her stepped forward and played beside her. Their voices and notes blended, creating harmony that had not been planned. The hall filled with energy, and even the band looked surprised. The two of them carried each other through the song, and the audience felt the spark. People clapped, not waiting for the end. They clapped while the music was still rising, giving their support freely. Keanu watched, a small smile forming on his face. He knew this was the moment she would never forget. When the song ended, the crowd stood once more. The young singer bowed, but this time she did not cry from shame. She cried from joy. She looked at the audience, then at Keanu, and her lips moved softly, forming the words, "Thank you." What she did not realize was that her story was not just about her anymore. In the crowd sat people with silent struggles, people who carried hidden failures. They watched her rise, and they felt something inside them rise too. The night was turning into more than a music show. It was becoming a lesson in respect, resilience, and kindness. And somewhere in the corner of the hall, the man with tired eyes, the worker who had been watching quietly, felt his own life shift. He whispered to himself, "Maybe I too can stand again." And for the first time in years, he believed it. But the night still held more secrets. Outside the hall, someone was waiting who would change everything once again. The shadow at the yay. The show ended with thunderous applause, and people began to leave the hall with hearts full of warmth. They spoke about the courage of the young singer, the harmony with the guitarist, and the strange beauty of the night. For many, it was a memory they knew would last. But as the lights dimmed and the seats emptied, one pair of eyes remained fixed on the stage. He was the man with tired eyes, the hall worker who had whispered to himself earlier. He did not move right away because something in him had shifted. He felt a spark he had not felt in years, a whisper telling him that life could still hold meaning. Backstage, the young singer finally found the courage to breathe. She sat on the floor with her guitar friend beside her. The weight of her failure was still inside her, but it no longer crushed her. Instead, it felt like a scar that proved she had survived. The guitarist smiled at her and said, "You turned pain into music. Not many can do that." She lowered her head, embarrassed, but a soft smile touched her lips. Then a quiet movement caught her attention. She looked up and saw Keanu walking slowly through the hallway. His steps were calm, unhurried, his presence humble, despite the whispers that followed him. She froze. Her heart pounded as if she were back on stage. For a moment, she thought of hiding. But then she remembered the respect he had shown her when no one else dared. If he had the courage to stand for her, then maybe she could have the courage to thank him. With trembling hands, she stood and walked toward him. The hallway felt endless, each step heavy. When she reached him, her voice shook as she said, "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. You saved me tonight." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not from shame. They were from gratitude. Keanu looked at her gently. He shook his head and replied, "You saved yourself. I only reminded others to respect you." His words were soft, yet they struck deep. He placed a hand lightly over his chest and added, "Remember, courage is not about never falling. It is about rising when you do." The young singer felt her heart open at his words. For years, she had believed that perfection was the only way to earn respect. But tonight, she learned that respect could come from honesty, from trying, from standing back up when the world laughed. She whispered, "I will remember." But while this quiet moment was unfolding outside the hall, another story was waiting. A man stood near the door, hidden in the shadows. He wore an old coat, and his hands trembled as he held a crumpled ticket. He had listened to the whole show from the back, though no one noticed him. His face carried lines of struggle, and his eyes carried sorrow. As people passed him, he did not move. He seemed frozen, lost in thought. Finally, when most of the crowd had left, he stepped forward. He walked into the hall, his shoes echoing on the empty floor. The tired worker noticed him and frowned. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. The man shook his head slowly and replied, "I only came to see if kindness was real." His voice was rough, like someone who had not spoken much in years. Those strange words caught the worker's heart. He looked closer at the man, and in that moment he realized this stranger was not here for music. He was here because he had been broken by life, and he wanted proof that hope was still alive. Tonight, he had seen it in the simple act of someone standing for another. But the man did not stay long. He turned and walked back out into the night, leaving behind only questions. Who was he? What burden did he carry? And why did he say those words? The young singer did not know of this shadow at the door. She was still with Keanu, still trying to gather her courage to speak more. The guitarist stood nearby, watching quietly, knowing this was a moment that would mark her forever. But none of them yet understood that the night's ripples were spreading far beyond what they could see. For in the dark streets outside, lives were being touched in silence, and the story was no longer about one singer or one actor. It was becoming about everyone who had ever felt small, forgotten, or broken. And soon those hidden stories would return to the hall, changing everything once more. The stranger's secret. The night outside was cold, the streets wet from a light rain that had fallen earlier. The man in the old coat walked slowly, his shoes tapping against the pavement. His mind was heavy, but his heart carried a spark he had not felt in years. He had told the worker that he only came to see if kindness was real, but the truth was deeper. He had once been a singer, too. Long ago, he had stood on a stage with dreams as bright as the lights that shone tonight. But failure had crushed him. The world had mocked him when he forgot his lines, and no one had stood up for him. He had left music that night and never returned. Decades passed, and his life became a path of struggles and regrets. He worked small jobs, drifted through cities, and carried the wound of that night like a shadow that never left. And yet, something inside him still longed for music, for dignity, for proof that a single mistake did not mean the end. When he heard about the show, he bought the cheapest ticket and sat quietly in the back, not to be entertained, but to see if the world had changed. When Keanu had stood for the young singer, the man felt something break inside him. It was the same moment he had longed for in his own past. He thought, if someone had done that for me, maybe my life would have been different. He left the hall, but the memory followed him, pressing into his heart like a whisper that refused to fade. Back. Inside, the young singer sat with Keanu and the guitarist, trying to gather courage to speak more. "I thought tonight was the end," she said softly. "But now I see. Maybe it is only the beginning." Keanu nodded and replied, "Every fall gives you two choices. Stay on the ground or rise stronger. You chose to rise." His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of experience. As they spoke, the tired worker entered and told them about the man in the coat. "He said he came to see if kindness was real," the worker explained. Then he walked out. The words hung in the air like a mystery. The singer frowned. Who was he? No one had an answer, but something about the story unsettled them all. Meanwhile, the man in the coat walked further into the city, humming softly to himself. His voice cracked, unused to song after so many years, but the melody was filled with sorrow and hope. He stopped under a broken streetlight, lifted his head, and whispered, "Maybe it's not too late." The next morning, news of the show began to spread. Headlines spoke not only of the performances, but of the moment when Keanu stood to honor the singer. Social media filled with clips and messages. People wrote about kindness, about respect, about second chances. What could have been remembered as a night of failure became a symbol of resilience. Strangers shared their own stories of falling and rising, and the world outside the hall was touched by a wave of inspiration. The young singer read some of those messages with tears in her eyes. She realized her mistake had turned into something bigger than herself. People were healing through her pain. She thought again about the man in the coat. Who was he, and why had his words felt so heavy? 2 nights later, during a rehearsal for another show, the worker noticed the same man standing near the back of the hall. His coat was still worn, his eyes still tired, but this time he did not hide in shadows. He held an old guitar in his hands. The worker approached and asked, "Did you come to watch again?" The man shook his head and replied, "No, I came to see if I can still play." The worker stared, surprised. The man continued, "I lost myself years ago. I thought I had no right to music. But that night, when I saw him stand up, when I saw the girl keep singing even after breaking, I realized maybe it is not too late for me. His voice trembled, but his eyes carried determination. What no one knew yet was that this man's return to music would not only heal his own wounds, but also test the strength of everyone connected to that night. The ripples were spreading wider, pulling more lives into their circle. The story that began with forgotten lyrics was now moving towards something even greater, redemption for a soul lost long ago. The return to the stage, the rehearsal hall was quiet, except for the sound of instruments being tuned. The young singer was preparing for her next performance, still nervous but stronger than before. She held her microphone with steadier hands now, remembering the lesson of that night. She told herself again and again, "Mistakes do not define me." The tired worker entered, his face showing surprise. Behind him walked the man in the old coat, clutching his guitar. His steps were slow, his shoulders bent with years of weight, but his eyes carried a fire that had not been there before. The young singer turned when she saw him and felt a strange pull, as if she had seen a ghost. The worker explained softly, "This is the man who said he came to see if kindness was real." The hall grew quiet. The guitarist from the first night looked at him curiously, while the young singer's heart filled with questions. The man placed his guitar case on the floor and opened it. Inside was an old, scratched instrument, the strings, worn but still alive with possibility. He ran his fingers across them, and though the sound was rough, it carried deep feeling. He whispered, "I walked away from music long ago. I forgot what it felt like to be seen. That night, when you forgot your lyrics and he stood for you. I saw the moment I had prayed for in my own past. It gave me courage to try again." The young singer stepped closer, her eyes wide. "You were a singer?" she asked softly. He nodded, his voice heavy with memory. "Once. But when I failed, no one stood. They laughed. I left the stage and never returned. I thought the world was finished with me, but maybe I was wrong." The guitarist spoke gently. "Play something. Let us hear." The man hesitated. His hands shook as he lifted the guitar. He closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were broken, uneven, but soon they shaped themselves into a melody full of sorrow and longing. His voice joined the strings, cracked at first, but then steady, carrying the pain of years. It was not the voice of youth anymore. It was the voice of survival. The room fell silent. Every person present felt the weight of his song. It told of nights filled with regret, of dreams abandoned, of battles fought in loneliness. Yet beneath all that pain was something stronger. Hope. It was fragile, but it was there, like a candle, refusing to die in the wind. The young singer pressed her hands to her chest. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness alone. She felt connected to him, as if their stories were pieces of the same puzzle. She whispered, "You have to perform." The man lowered his guitar quickly, shaking his head. "No, the stage is not for me anymore. I am too old, too broken." But Keanu, who had been listening quietly from the corner, finally stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "Respect is not about age. Music is not about perfection. It is about truth. You carry truth in your voice. The world needs to hear it." The man's eyes met Keanu's, and for the first time in many years, he felt seen. Not as a failure, not as someone forgotten, but as a human being with worth. His lips trembled, and he whispered, "But what if I fail again?" Keanu placed a hand gently on his shoulder and answered, "Then fail with dignity. Fail with courage, because failure is not the opposite of music, it is part of it." The room went still. Everyone knew this was no longer just about a rehearsal. It was about redemption. The man in the old coat looked down at his guitar, then at the faces around him. He saw no judgment, only respect. Slowly, he nodded. Then, I will try. Not for fame, not for the past, but for the truth inside me. And in that moment, it was decided. The next show would not just belong to the young singer or the guitarist, it would belong also to the man who once walked away. The stage was waiting, and so was his second chance. The night of second chances, the day of the next show arrived, and the hall was once again filled with excitement. People came not only for music, but also for the memory of what had happened before. Whispers spread through the crowd. The night Keanu stood for a forgotten singer, the night the audience remembered. Respect. The story had traveled far, and now people came with hearts ready for something more than just songs. Backstage, the young singer stood nervously with the guitarist. She had grown stronger, but the weight of expectation still pressed on her shoulders. She looked at the old man in the coat, now holding his guitar with shaky hands. His face was pale, but his eyes were brighter than before. He whispered, "I should not be here." The singer touched his arm gently and replied, "You belong here more than anyone." Keanu was there too, standing quietly near the edge of the stage. He had no spotlight on him, no microphone, yet his presence felt larger than the lights above. When the old man's doubt rose again, Keanu's calm gaze steadied him. He said simply, "Remember, you are not alone this time." The show began, and one by one the performers filled the hall with their voices. The crowd applauded warmly, but everyone was waiting for the moment they had heard about. When the young singer walked on stage again, the hall hushed. This time, she was not alone. The guitarist stood beside her, and behind them walked the old man. At first, the audience was confused. Whispers moved through the seats. "Who is he?" they asked. "Why is he here?" But then the music began. The guitarist strummed the first chords. The young singer joined with her steady voice, and then the old man's voice broke through, rough but full of truth. It was a voice shaped by years of silence, years of sorrow, but it carried something, rare, raw honesty. The cracks in his tone made the melody more powerful, not less. The young singer's soft voice rose beside his, wrapping his pain with warmth, while the guitar bound them together. The hall grew still. People stopped breathing, for a moment, caught by the depth of what they were hearing. The old man's words spoke of broken dreams, but also of hope still burning. His song was not about perfection, it was about survival, about rising after decades of being silent. And then something unexpected happened. The audience, remembering Keanu's act from before, began to clap again, not at the end of the song, but in the middle. It started with a few, then grew into a wave, the same way it had lifted the young singer. But this time, it was for him. For the man who had once believed the stage was lost to him forever. The old man's voice trembled, but he did not stop. He sang through the applause, tears streaming down his face. The young singer reached out and held his hand as she sang, giving him strength. The guitarist's notes rose higher, filling the hall with fire and light. Together, the three of them created something unforgettable. A song that was not about success or failure, but about courage, dignity, and kindness. When the song ended, the hall erupted. The applause was louder than anything that night. People stood clapping, cheering, some even crying. The old man bowed his head, overwhelmed. He whispered, "I never thought I would see this day." The young singer leaned close and said softly, "You showed us what it means to rise." The guitarist nodded, his eyes shining. In the audience, Keanu watched quietly. He did not stand. This time, because he did not need to. Respect had already filled the room. His small act had grown into something larger than himself. He smiled faintly, knowing that kindness had once again proved stronger than judgment. The old man removed his coat and laid it gently on the side of the stage. It was as if he was leaving behind the years of silence and shame. With his guitar still in his hands, he looked out at the crowd and whispered into the microphone, "Thank you for giving me back my voice." That night was remembered not for perfect music, but for something greater. It was remembered as the night respect turned failure into strength, the night kindness gave birth to courage, and the night forgotten hearts were seen again. And long after the lights faded and the hall emptied, people carried the story home, telling it to friends, to children, to strangers. It was not just about a singer who forgot her lyrics or an old man who returned to the stage. It was about humanity, about how one simple act of respect could change the course of many lives. Keanu left the hall quietly, walking into the night. He did not need applause. He only needed the knowledge that kindness had done its work, and for the young singer, the guitarist, and the old man, their lives would never be the same again. They had learned that the world does not remember perfection. It remembers hearts that choose respect, humility, and resilience.